Mark, off camera, we were talking about you're moving out to Santa Barbara, UCSB from the East Coast, and you didn't know anyone. So you have a bachelor's in film studies and then a master's in motion picture and
Producing.
Producing?
Yep.
Okay, great. What did those degrees prepare you for? And in the long run, now looking back on it, what classes do you think were missing from the curriculum?
Well, so Santa Barbara was much more critical studies, not so much production. When I had applied out here, I was transferring as a junior, so there was no time for me to sort of work my way into the film program. I either had to get into the film program or bust. And I didn't get into UCLA at all. And USC I got into, but I didn't get into the film program. And so Santa Barbara, at the time, it was the only one that accepted me. And I was a little bit iffy on going to Santa Barbara. I had never been there, and I was like, oh, they're too far from LA. Oh, it's film studies and not production. And my dad stops me. He's like, you'll like it. And I go, I don't know. You'll like it. He just stopped me. He's like, you'll like it. Trust me. So I just jumped on a plane a week before school started and just flew out to Santa Barbara. I'd never visited the campus. I was like, wow. Okay. And when I got there, man, I was like, wow, did I hit the honeypot? It was something. Just kind of going through the campus on that first day. And so, I think a lot of the classes there, it gave me a very good background in terms of, the film classics and what in those films generated such a response from audiences. What was it, in terms of how they spoke to that generation and what themes were in there, and just really kind of studying the anatomy of the film. There was also some production, but a lot of it was really just studies. So, it was a different type of education than I expected, but maybe was the platform that I kind of needed before I jumped into to working in the film industry, getting that sort of understanding about classic films and who made them and why they made them and how they affected people. But I don't know if when I was taking the classes, if there was any necessary class that I thought wasn't, that was missing from the curriculum. I mean, we had a lot of, there was a porn class, which I didn't take. Oh. They actually taught a porn class.
Directing porn or film. Starring?
Just analyzing porn films.
Okay.
Yeah, just again, because it was studies.
Wow.
There was on Chinese cinema. I mean, you wanted to learn about 1950s Swedish cinema. I mean, there was classes on just about everything. And there were certain mandatory ones, that you had to take. The 101 series was films on, the first section was films on the silent era, then on sort of the era from the advent of sound up through the Paramount Decree, when they sort of integrated the all the studios were vertically integrated. They controlled the theaters, the distribution, and the production. So up until sort of when the government got involved and said, no, you can't actually have movie screens as well. You can't own exhibition, distribution, and production. And then the last section was up from there up to modern day cinema. So we even watched The Matrix in film studies and analyzed that. And I think it just gave me a platform and an understanding of, film content and storytelling that, laid a nice platform before I got involved in the actual production. So that was Santa Barbara. And then UCLA was definitely, in terms of a producing program, a lot more oriented toward the business of filmmaking. So, I had what I liked about UCLA. I'm not a huge fan of academics. I'm not a huge fan of people that just teach and haven't done in 20 years. I like to learn from the people who are doing it now. And so UCLA's professors were all people that were working at the time. So my marketing professor was Terry Press, who was the head of all of DreamWorks marketing. I mean, her boss was Steven Spielberg. She was the top of marketing, and she came and taught a class for 3 hours every Wednesday night or whatever it was. So learning marketing from her, it's like you're learning from the best. Or Eric Baum, who was the senior VP of business affairs at Sony, was my contracts and negotiations professor. He was doing it at the time, and he'd come teach the class at night. So
cool.
Yeah, I learned a lot. I would say probably my two biggest mentors there were Meg LaFoe, who was Jodie Foster's producing partner at the time, and she just a genius at script development, just an absolute genius. And then Merle Schreidman, who taught me production, and I produced a few actual projects within UCLA. And so I would say, they were probably my two biggest mentors. I'd say in terms of, classes that might have been missing, there was no, new media hadn't really, become a thing yet, even though it was sort of in the nascent stages. So, because this was 01 to 03. So it's like it would be pre-YouTube. Mm-hmm. But at the time, I was creating CD-ROM media packages for artists and stuff. So there was a nascent new media sphere. And there wasn't a lot. I think it was really maybe almost too early, but there wasn't a lot in the producers program for that. It was mostly traditional film and television. But I didn't feel like, man, I wish they had, more of this or that or the other there. I felt like I got out of it what I wanted to get out of it.
And on the weekends or days off, were you taking the train down to LA while you were in Santa Barbara?
I had a car.
Oh, you had a car?
I did. Mm-hmm. And I was interning so like I said, I came into Santa Barbara my junior year. So I was there for 2 years, junior, senior. So during my senior year, I interned at Film Roman, where they do The Simpsons. Mm-hmm. But I interned for the feature film department, which I don't even think is around. I don't know if they're around anymore. I don't think they are. But they're around for a small time. They did a movie called My First Mister with Christine Lottie.
Right.
And they were in development on a number of other things. So I did intern for them, and it was a good experience. I mean, I started doing coverage, so learning how to do coverage and just, understanding what they were looking for in a script. That was my first sort of practical hands-on experience in Los Angeles. And it was a good one. It was good.
So it prepared you, because Santa Barbara is a beautiful, amazing place, and I would love to live there now.
Yeah.
But it is a bubble of happiness and sunshine and things. And so to come back to Hollywood and struggle for a parking spot and finding a place to live that's safe, it can be a little. I was just wondering what that culture shock was like a little bit. So
because I had made a very good friend when I first moved to Santa Barbara. I think everything happens for a reason. You meet the people you need to meet at the right times. And so this guy, Doug, that I had met within the first few weeks of going to Santa Barbara, this guy was like Mr. California. I mean, knew everything. He had moved out here from West Virginia and just loved it. If you said anything even halfway sideways against California, he'd go off. He'd be like, what are you talking about, man? This is the best. Santa Barbara alone has 1,500, species of plant that are indigenous only to Santa Barbara. What are you talking about? And this guy would convince me to cut class and go play volleyball with him, go mountain hiking with him. I mean, this guy loved everything about the state, loved being outdoors.
Nice.
And so he took me to LA a few times. We would go take road trips and go down to Los Angeles. And he just knew everything, not just about Santa Barbara, but the whole, southern seaboard, it seemed like. And so between that and the internship, I'd come down to LA enough, events, with some other friends, and just even some class trips. I remember we took one from Santa Barbara and went to CBS Television City to watch a show being taped and then talk to the producers. So I'd come down enough that I kind of felt comfortable enough with it, and it didn't seem as much of a culture shock when I moved down here. The culture shock was Philadelphia to Santa Barbara. That was the culture shock. It was so different.
I bet, yeah, from hoagies to
submarine sandwiches or whatever.
Right.
It was a big. It was a big difference in terms of I think for 2 weeks all I did was stare at palm trees and license plates, because it's just California and the palm tree, and I was just wow, I'm here, because California license plates and palm trees are two things you don't see in Philadelphia. I just think I was just so enamored with just for the first few weeks, just being. I was like, wow, I'm actually here. So by the time I went to LA, it was more just kind of just a lateral move. It's like, okay, now that's where I need to live. But I had visited LA many, many times before I even moved to Santa Barbara. So I'd been on vacation and I'd been to Los Angeles. So it wasn't a huge shock.
So fast forward a few years, your first producing job, what was it? What did it teach you? How did you get it?
So I guess my first producing job out of school happened. I had met up with an old friend, Jesse, became my producing partner. For 11 years we were producing partners. And so we had met up and having lunch or hanging out or whatever. And he said, I'm doing music videos. How would you feel about directing a music video? Because I had done a little bit of directing in college. And I'm like, I wasn't sure that's what I wanted to do. Like, do I really have a passion for directing? And I said, I don't really know music videos that well. What if I just produced it with you and kind of, sort of got my bearings and really saw what it was about. And, I felt like I was good putting stuff together. And then, as I work on it, if there's a specific area that I really like, we can, maybe I can discuss with you. And if it's directing, if it's something else, I can, discuss that with you. So this first music video was for a group called The Real Seduction. They're like an R&B group. They were MC Hammer's like backup singer, dancers, the guys like behind them that would be doing the whole, they started their own R&B group. And so I remember like he had hit them up for, I can't remember what the budget was, $5,000 or $6,000, $6,500 maybe. And back then everything was 35 millimeter. There was no, stuff was not being shot on digital video, not at least at a professional level. So we were doing 35 mil. And as I started working with him, I realized somebody needs to actually physically put this together. I didn't at the time really understand the difference between a line producer, a UPM, a producer. I'm just like, I just know somebody needs to put this together. So I just sort of jumped into that line producer UPM role and started like finding crew and booking the equipment, and we got to find locations, and we hired a director. And I was like, man, I like this because I get to be part of everything. I get to be part of every single part of the process as opposed to just one. And, throughout post, even long after the director's gone, I get to, all the way through delivery to the client, I get to be part of the whole thing. So that music video was the start, I think, of my interest. I hadn't necessarily decided for a fact that, yes, 100% I want to produce, but I started liking it. I started liking that hands-on, like, wow, this is cool. I get to make, I'm the guy that's making the decisions. I get to say yes or no. It was very creative. It was a very creative position. And so from there, I think it sort of escalated, and we started doing, once you have one music video and you can show it to a band and they're like, oh, wow, this is great. We got $5,000 to it. So my partner and I were running around Sunset Boulevard, hitting up bands at clubs, and however we could meet them, hustling. We were hustling, and that's how we started, just doing music videos. Yeah.
Where would you find the crew and the directors and things? Where were you actually finding it?
Well, yeah. So yeah, back then there wasn't all these, there was no social networks, and there wasn't things like that. I guess a lot of it was, if I remember, it's like so long ago, word of mouth. I'm trying to think how I first built up my crew relationships. I guess a lot of it was word of mouth. So Jesse had already been down in LA for a year. So, I know he knew some people. It's like, hey, I got this director, I think he can do it. And that director had a DP. So it's like, oh, make sure in my little database, okay, make sure that I log that guy, the DP's info in for future. And then that DP is like, oh, I'll bring out my team. And then, oh, hey, there's some ACs. And, so a lot of it is just networking and word of mouth. I think a lot of it probably also was going to events and things. So networking events, and some of it's school, there are people that you go to school with. I went to UCLA in 2001, about a year after I moved down to LA. So there were definitely some, once you're in a master's level program, a lot of those people that's what they're going to be doing. It's not like they're chemistry majors, but they really want to do something else. Once you're in a master's program, it's usually like that's your career trajectory. So I did meet actors and DPs and production designers and stuff at UCLA, and I think that also helped me grow my crew base. So it's it's relationships.
When you went to these clubs or events on the Sunset Strip, were you going to like Gazzari's, or maybe I'm dating myself with that one, but the Rainbow and the Roxy,
Room,
right? Okay,
Viper
and
Room,
so
the Derby, the
right, okay,
Coconut Room. I don't think that's around anymore, but yeah, I think
right.
you and I probably both.
Yeah, I think the FM station. I'm probably dating myself with that one, but yeah, I think that was almost like post. That was more grunge era, but we're...
Yeah, a little after the grunge era, but there was still a lot, like the Key Club, I don't think that's around anymore. Right. Yeah, so...
And what was your approach at these? You were just, it was easy to talk to people. There was no phones. People weren't pulling out phones to take a selfie with.
There was... Cell phones, I think, started getting popular in 2001 with the small flip phones, but it wasn't as prevalent now because all you did on it was make phone calls.
Sure.
It wasn't texting and video and internet.
Right.
So yeah, it wasn't as intrusive, but... my partner was more not gregarious. He was a good opener. He was a good schmoozer. So he did a lot of that. not to in any way compare our careers but just as an analogy, Jerry Bruckheimer and Don Simpson, they're like, phew. But Simpson was very much that kind of schmoozer, an idea guy, and he'd go out and he was a good opener, and Jerry Bruckheimer is more like the hands-on management, day-to-day, get it done guy. And I think that was also, Jesse and I had that same kind of relationship. So he would really go out and mine the opportunities, and then I would come in and sit down and do meetings when it was time to talk logistics. So if Jesse was out at a club and he met a band, he'd give him his business card and, hey, we could do a video. And then they'd call him back and say, hey, we're really excited. And Jesse would kind of schmooze him a little bit on the phone, and then we would both go in, maybe go back to the club and meet with them. And I would talk to him about, here's how I think we can actually pull it off. And the more videos I did, obviously, the more confident I got doing that. So I really let Jesse open it, and then I think I would close it with the execution. Here's how we're going to execute it. How can you do a video for $5,000? Well, here's how we can do it. We get great crew rates. We got relationships with this, and we can use short ends for the film, and like all this kind of stuff. And like, okay, cool. They start to see how it could be done.
Like the two Steves. We were just talking about that earlier. Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak. So one had one set of duties, the other had the other, and it worked, right?
They had two sets of skills, and right. Yeah, and they I think just like a marriage, it's two people that can bring, two different things to the table and make each other better in the process. And I think that's what, Jesse and I were able to do, is two complementary but different skills that made us better as a whole.
Do you still read scripts?
I do. I still read scripts. Because I work as a producer, my model's a little bit different. So I left Treasure in 2011. I was just ready for something different. Treasure was a lot to do because Treasure Entertainment, the company I had with Jesse, was a lot because you're running the company as a day-to-day sort of executive, but you're also producing projects. I also had management clients because I was managing. It was a lot to do. And it took up a lot of my time, and honestly, I wanted something different. I wanted something where I felt like I was being compensated adequately for the amount of time and skill I had accrued to that point. And I said, I think I could just do better on my own. It was just time to move on and try something different. But I also didn't want to continue just chasing money and trying to shop scripts and that sort of thing. And I said, I think I've built up enough skill, enough relationships and resources and experience that I can basically whore myself out as a producer for hire. I tell people I'm a whore. I am a whore. In that, people with a project that's got some funding behind it can come to me, and I will look at the script, and I'm going to be a lot less, some people are going to kill me for saying this, but I'm going to be a lot less discerning than I would if it was my money. If I'm looking to buy a script or I have to shop it, I can understand why a lot of producers will pass. If it's not that one in 1,000 script that they've been looking for, they're pass, because they're putting their reputation out there as they're trying to sell it and get it made, and they need to think that they can raise money for it. I don't put that same level of discernment when I read scripts. When I read a script, people are hiring me, so it's they hire me for development services to help them get their script in shape. They can hire me for budgeting services. They can hire me for a business plan, or they can hire me to actually produce the project. Because it's a job for hire, yes, I'll read the script, and as long as it's not a complete piece of garbage, in my opinion. I have had people take scripts to me, pay me to budget, and then say, oh, will you produce it? And I'll say, no. And they say, why not? I'm like, I just don't think it's a good script at all. I'll tell them straight up. This is the East Coast thing we were talking about before.
Right, earlier.
Mm-hmm. Is I have no problem telling people I think it's horrible. And I had a client that had brought a script to me and had me budget it, and then asked me if I would produce it. And I said, oh, no, I'm not interested in producing it. And he's like, well, what would it need? And I said, we would need to develop this whole script from scratch. I mean, you have issues with your main characters. They don't have any goals. They don't have any flaws. There's no central conflict. I don't know who your antagonist is. The story's all over the place. It's not shoot ready. Even if you paid me, I just wouldn't be interested in doing it. And he said, okay, I'll start over with you. Let's go through the development. And we threw the whole budget out he had just hired me to do, and then he paid me to help develop the script and then do a whole new budget after a year and a half of development on the script. So for me, I tell people, some people say, that's a passion project. I want someone who's passionate. And I say, listen, passion doesn't keep my lights on. Once you've been doing this long enough, you like making a living and earning money doing what you're doing. But if I feel like the project's lacking, but I feel like I can find my passion as we work on it, sometimes I look at it and I say, but this guy, I really like working with him. I see how we can make this project better. And I know this person who's hiring me is open to the creative development process. They're open to hearing out my ideas and letting me, whether it's an executive producer, whether it's a lot of times I get hired by the writer director and they have financing from somewhere, but they don't want to do the day-to-day producing. And so I'll come on as the main producer, or I'll come on as a producer with them. As long as I believe that they're open to the creative process and that I can read that script and go, I can get passionate about this. I can find my passion as we work on it. I don't need to be passionate from the second I read it. Once I sign on the dotted line, you hire me and I'm involved in producing this picture, I'm 110% into the picture. It's not, well, I'm not so sure, you're not passionate about it at first. Once I put my name on the dotted line, that picture has my undivided attention, and I'm gonna make it as great as I can be. As long as I see the potential for it to be great, and the potential for me to be able to put my fingerprints on it and be able to find my passion as we work on it, yeah, I'll sign on to that. I'll sign on to that project as long as I see that potential. So my level of discernment's a little bit different than someone who's having to put up their own money and go out and chase. But it allows me to work on a whole lot of other projects that I might not have otherwise even known about. And also make a living doing it, which is nice when you can make a living doing what you love.
Absolutely. What if all the pieces are there, but the one thing is you sense that one of the decision makers is not real flexible, and you kind of have that gut feeling going in, or maybe there's things that are telltale signs. They're not. It's not an instinct. You can see it. Do you say no? Do you say, well, okay, I can kind of work around this?
That's a great question, because I just had a phone call with a guy who was introduced to me, and I could tell talking to him that we wouldn't have gotten on very well. He comes from outside the film world. To me, he seemed like a guy who thinks he knows more than he does know. And so, I like people who are going to bring me on because I bring a certain skill set and knowledge that they don't have, and that they're going to listen to me. And when it comes to those sort of areas that I know about, they're going to defer to me. And if I don't feel like that's going to be the case, it's probably not the best fit. So even if there's a consortium of people, and even if I feel like even one of them might be problematic, yeah, I'll pass. I mean, life's too short at the end of the day. I still want to work with people that I want to work with. I've been fortunate and blessed enough that 9 times out of 10, the people I'm introduced to are, they're go-getters. They have a creative vision. They're excited about their project, and they're open to that creative process. And I used to say, I just need 3 things from you. I need a script, I need your budget, I need you to get the hell out of my way. And I guess a joke, half joking, but it's true, meaning, right. But let me do what I do. Mm-hmm. And so many of the people that hire me, they are writers or directors or executive producers that don't know enough about filmmaking, and that's exactly what they want. They say, I just want to direct. I know the story I want to take, but I need a producer who can come help me realize this vision. And I'll talk to them about it, and I'll say, hey, here's a way I think we can do this, and here's a way I think we can take what you've done and make it even better and elevate the material. Would you be willing to do it? And they're like, yeah, okay, yeah, that's actually great. I get that sort of feeling from them that in those initial meetings that we'd work great together. And a lot of times they hire me for a service, and I tell them, you can hire me to develop your script, you can hire me to budget it. Does not mean I'm attached to your picture as a producer. But that's a good thing for me because it also, during that phase, allows me to feel them out and see throughout that budgeting phase, throughout that development phase, or the business plan, or whatever we're doing, do I like working with them? Do I like them as much as, it's not just them interviewing me, it's me interviewing them. And usually by the time we're done that process, 9 times out of 10, they're like, if they have the financing together, they're like, I want you to produce this, let's go. And I know by that point as well whether I want to move forward. And like I said, 9 times out of 10, I'm like, great, let's do it.
So over the course of the years, it sounds like you've honed that, whether it's phrases that you've heard someone say where yes, this is going to be a working relationship, or no, I don't think this is going to work. So is it much faster for you now? You can kind of know right off the bat? Oh,
for sure. For sure, it's much faster now, knowing whether I want to work with certain people. Absolutely. I mean, and part of it is just learning to trust your instincts. I mean, I think when you're starting off, you're so hungry. A lot of times you're willing to ignore red flags. But, as I've gone, I'm not desperate for work. I'm not, I can still be somewhat, somewhat discerning if I want. I think, you set your rules, you set your parameters, I'm very clear now with people in the nicest possible way when people come to me like, hey, I have this script and I need to raise money. And I'm like, I don't shop scripts, I don't raise money. Here's what I do. And once you have your equity together, you feel free to talk to me. If you want to bring me on as, for hire, I work for you. So at the end of the day, and they're like, oh, great. And I've had people come back to me and say, hey, I got my, they appreciate you being upfront.
Sure.
But yeah, I've learned to notice red flags quick. And if I see a couple of them, I don't feel uncomfortable walking away.
What 5 things does a screenplay have to have for you to be interested in it as a producer?
5 things?
Yeah.
What 5 things? I never thought about breaking it down to 5 things. I think, first and foremost for me is the script just has to be, in my eyes, like well written. So, it's got to be I think a story that, and I don't care what the story is in terms of genre or, people ask me like, do you care about a certain genre? And you seem to work in all different genres. I said, yeah, because to me, a good story transcends genre. It has nothing to do with genre. Genre is just sort of a set of conventions that allow people to identify what kind of movie it is and therefore whether they want to see it or not. But genre has nothing to do with whether you could tell a good story in any genre. And to me, working in different genres is part of the excitement of working in this business. Like that's why so many of us love being in this business, right? We don't go to the same office necessarily every day, and we're always pursuing something different. And so the having different genres to work in is great. So to me, it's just a well-told story. Like, is there some sort of character, some sort of protagonist? Can I identify with his journey in some way? I'm not even going to use the word likable. I'm just going to say, is it like a protagonist I can identify with in some way? I want to follow him for some reason. Does he have goals? Does he have flaws? Is there an antagonist that's creating conflict with this guy, or girl, or whatever the situation is? But is there something I can get behind? And is there a strong theme? Like, why are you telling this story? So I think just in terms of just being well written, and then I would say number 2 is then what's the budget range, and is it a budget range that's reasonable? So a lot of people. They come to me and I get a lot of, how much would it cost to do this script? And I'm like, well, I'll tell you what, I'll answer that question if you can answer a question for me. How long's a piece of string? That's what I like to ask them. You can't just give me a script. How much does it cost to make that? Was Matt Damon in your movie? Great. Well, your budget just went up by $10 million. I can make an argument to do this movie for $1 million or $10 million. So really it's more like, well, how much can you raise? And then, or how much do you have? Or, if they really don't have a good idea of this, who do you see in it? How wide do you see it being distributed? But I have to get an idea of sort of what range and how big they're seeing this in their head. And a lot of times I might read not a lot of times, but sometimes I might read the script and go, well, that's not gonna happen on this. You're not gonna do Avatar on a $500,000 budget or whatever. So it has to be doable, for the budget. And beyond that too, just I guess logistically feasible. So, for me to do, I sometimes I look at it and I go, yeah, the budget's okay. It's possible, but I think for some other logistical reason, it would be very challenging to pull this off, even if it's, budget wise, it can be done. There might be something else I might see that would preclude it from being, or actually at least allowing me to do it effectively for whatever that reason is. But I think those are really the 2 main things that I look for is just, is the budget reasonable for the script, and is the script, well written? And beyond that, do I like working with this person? Do I get a good sense? Because you're going to spend a year or more dealing with this person, depending on the scope of my duties. So, sometimes I'm just literally brought on there's no development. I'm like, okay, the script's decent, and I think I can influence it enough through the production process to make it a good picture. And then at post, when I deliver the master drive or the DCP or whatever the final deliverable is, I'm done. I'm not involved in marketing or distribution. There are projects like that. It just depends on the term of the contract. So, but I would say at the least, I'm spending at least a year with this person. So, yeah, well-written script, reasonable budget, and logistics, and I like the person. Those are really my main criteria. I don't know if I could get to 5. I don't think I can get to 5.
There's 3, right?
Yeah. There could be sub factors within there, but those are sort of the broad scope factors.
I noticed you said something about going to a day job, and I just want to ask you about that. Did you ever try a day job, and how did you know it wasn't for you, and how did you know you liked the, not uncertainty, but the variation? of producing?
I did have day jobs. My first job with my old producing partner Jesse I worked for Bobby Newmeyer, who produced the quintessential indie film movie that started the entire movement as we know it, as like indie film as we know it today. Bobby produced the movie that started it all, which is Sex, Lies, and Videotape back in '89, right?
Fantastic.
I mean, that was the one. That was before Pulp Fiction and Clerks or any of those. I mean, that was like the one. I mean, there were indie movies before that, like Blood Simple and stuff, but they didn't kick off the movement the way Sex, Lies did. Like that was like this whole groundbreaking thing that inspired filmmakers to like, hey, we can do this. And so he was a great mentor. And so I worked for him as an assistant. And so my old producing partner, Jesse, we were both his assistants. So day job working for Bobby, we were working on Training Day, on a movie Training Day, and on another movie called National Security with Martin Lawrence and Steve Zahn. It was a comedy, like buddy kind of cop. And then Santa Claus 2 we had in development. So Bobby was very prolific. And then at night, that's when we were like hitting up bands and shooting videos on weekends and things. So, I worked for him throughout 2000 to like the beginning of 2001. I got into UCLA, and that's why, I couldn't be an assistant because the hours are just too, especially for like a big producer. But I learned a lot about the studio system working for Bobby because he had deals with Warner Brothers and Intermedia. And so it was a good learning experience, and I was just starting off. And then I had the luxury of not having to work a day job throughout school because I was living on school loans when I was at UCLA, and the classes were at night, so I could work on building my business in the day and go to school at night. But when I got out of school, it was like, we hadn't gotten to the point where I could live on the money yet. So I got a job working for a trailer house as an assistant called Open Road. And they're owned by a company called New Wave in Burbank. New Wave Entertainment is a pretty big company. And I kind of transitioned up through the ranks in New Wave and became a supervisor for the print department. So we did all the posters for we did Borat and Fantastic Four. And we had done a lot of, Simpsons and stuff, Fox stuff. And so I was doing music videos and commercials and some indie feature stuff while I was also working that day job up until about 2007. And that's when I was at a point where I could finally kind of go full time and like eke out a living. And so for the next 4 years, I was full time Treasure Entertainment until I left. Yeah, that was good. Yeah.
Do you think it's a mistake for a filmmaker to think about distribution and marketing after they've made the movie? Okay.
I absolutely 100% think it is a mistake to only start thinking about marketing and distribution after the film is done. And again, I'm going to say more things that are going to piss people off, is I really think the film schools have it all wrong. And, I mentioned that guy that I spoke with recently who I just didn't feel like I would get along with. And he's one of these guys that just doing it for the passion. And then I explained to him, there's a reason we call it show business and not show. And I stole that from Peter Gruber, by the way, who was one of my professors at UCLA, and he used to say this. It's not show, it's show business. If you just want to go out and make a piece of art for yourself and you have the money to blow, go ahead. But that doesn't mean you're going to be part of the entertainment industry. That doesn't mean you're going to be part of the film business. It is a business, it is a commodity as well as art. That's where people get hung up as well. It's art, right. It's art, but it's also a commodity. And the people sacrifice one for the other. And I read an article the other, maybe it was a couple months ago, that just, oh my God, I was like a cartoon. My head was like, I was so annoyed with this article. It just started with, okay, now you've finished your film. Now it's time to start thinking about distribution. I'm like, no, it's not. I was starting to start thinking about distribution ages ago. From the script stage, you should have been thinking about distribution. And I've told filmmakers I've worked with, the smart way to do it is, they always have this script that they just really want to do. And have you considered your audience? Have you considered whether there's an audience for it? Have you considered how you're going to get to that audience? Have you considered, how big that audience is and whether it justifies the budget you want to spend, and et cetera, et cetera. Have you looked at the market and how many other films just like it are out in the market? How oversaturated that is? I don't know how many times I've heard people say, I'm going to do horror because it's so cheap, so you can make a bunch of money on it. But you're only considering one thing. You're only considering budget. You're not considering drawbacks of horror, like the fact that when you go to AFM, there's 18 other films with posters on the wall that look exactly like yours, all competing for that same shelf space or that same distributor who only has a budget to acquire so many films. You're not considering the fact that a lot of name talent doesn't like to do horror, which I was up against on my latest film, The Basement. It was tough. Even casting directors know that, and a lot of casting directors don't want to touch horror because they know a lot of name actors just avoid horror movies. which is why so many times you see horror movies with most of the time like nobody in it that you really recognize, unless there's like really smart, different sort of horror. Maybe you see some people take a chance on it, but they're not necessarily looking at it like a business. I tell people there's no other industry in which you would spend millions and millions and millions of dollars like on R&D and developing like widgets and mass producing widgets. I'm going to set up a big manufacturing space, big warehouse. I'm going to make widgets, and I've got this whole staff of people boxing up widgets. And then when I'm done, I have this huge warehouse of widgets, and I'm like, all right, now let me figure out how I can sell these. You identify a need in the market, like, hey, people are renting or buying these kind of movies, and there's definitely an opportunity here. And I have a great story I think I can tell within that, and consulting with distributors and sales agents who know the marketplace. And if you don't want to, if you're afraid to get the distributors and sales agents involved early and find out what the market looks like and what buyers are looking for and what budget ranges those pictures are in and which ones are making money. If you don't want to do that, and then you make a picture and you make no money, you really don't have anyone to blame but yourself. It's absolutely the end use and the marketing, the distribution and publicity, festivals, you should be looking at that from the beginning, from inception of your story. And so, I mean, a lot of times it falls on deaf ears, but I always advise the filmmakers, so we should get distributors and sales agents involved from the get-go. I'm not saying it's going to make it foolproof that you're going to get a return on your investment because of that, but it's going to, I think, get you a lot closer. I think, are they always right? No. They can be wrong as well, but they know a lot more than we do. And just like you trust a DP to shoot the picture because he knows more about lighting and camera than you do, or an editor because he knows a lot more about cutting than you do, distributors and sales agents know more about selling in the market than you do. And so if you want a better chance at getting some sort of return, involve people that know more about what they do than you do about what they do. And I say this all the time when I hire people. I said, look, I hired you because you know more about what you do than I know about what you do. So I'm going to tell you the result I want. I'm going to tell you when I want it by. I'm going to tell you what resources I'm going to give you to get me that result. And if you say, yep, I can do it, I'm going to say, great, go do it then. And I'm here to support you. You tell me, hey, I need you to do this or that. As long as it's within those parameters, done. If there's a problem, we'll fix it. And we'll make sure it doesn't happen again. So, trust but verify, but I don't stand over their shoulders, making sure. I hired you because this is what you do and you're better at it than I am. So go do it. And the crew loves that. And the sales agents and the distributors, treat them like part of your team, because by the time people have made their movie and come to the distributors are like, well, there's not much we can do with it now. We could try to craft a marketing campaign, but if you had this person in it, and if you had only spent this much, and if you had done these things with the story, we'd be in a lot better of a position. Now, all we have, we didn't have any say in the story or script. We didn't have any say in the casting. We didn't have any say in the budget. Now all we have is the marketing campaign, but we're stuck with the movie we have. There's not much we can do with it now. So I am absolutely a fan of people getting distributors and sales agents, or talking to them, producers, reps, whoever you can that knows the marketplace, get them involved as early as possible.
Do you remember your first film market? Like what that was like walking around, whether it was AFM or something? I mean, just surprises, things that you were kind of shocked by?
Yeah. I think it was AFM, actually, was probably the first one I'd ever gone to. And yeah, I mean, I really didn't know what to expect. You walk in because it's held in Santa Monica, and the L'Amerigo and the Lowe's kind of are like right next to the Lowe's, I guess, is the main one. But and then it sort of spills over into sort of outside areas and things. But I do remember, because I remember parking and being there for a meeting and then coming out a couple hours later and them charging me like $80 for parking. I'm like, are you insane?
Welcome to Santa Monica.
Yeah, I was like, this is insane. And I think next time I parked at the beach for $20 and I was like, I mean, it's like not like, it's just, to me, it's like a value thing. Like, I'm seriously wasting that much money on parking. That's right. Coming from Philadelphia, where you could park anywhere and not pay. So I remember that, and the food and drinks are outrageous. But I think AFM for me was probably, it was a little eye-opening, but also I didn't feel like I got personally a huge amount of value out of it, because a lot of people I'm meeting with were people that live in LA. And so I didn't at the first one, I didn't really get an opportunity to meet a lot of I was meeting with people who are based here. I'm like, God, why am I paying $80 for parking and $60 for a sandwich and a drink or whatever to meet with people I can just set up meetings with after AFM. So, in subsequent years, I wanted to make sure if I was going to go to AFM, I would only go if I really had some specific reason to be there, a picture I was working on, or meetings with people from out of town that I couldn't otherwise meet with, and not big on video calls. Like if I'm going to get all ready and comb the hair and get all, it's because I'm going out. I don't want to have to do that just for a video call. I mean, half the time when I'm talking on the phone, I look like a complete slob. So I don't want just to do a phone call. I don't want to get all. So I was going to the AFM in subsequent years to actually meet people that I didn't have the opportunity to interact with face to face. And more specifically, if I had a project, and a reason I needed to be there, because a lot of times, I have a sales agent or I have a rep that's there, and there's no reason to buy $2,000 badges to go up in the suites if I have a team there. Like, you don't need me to go up in the suites, with you. So I think AFM is good. It's good for what it's for, which is buyers and sellers to interact and to negotiate and discuss deals from sort of a top level, and then you can do the sort of nuanced stuff later. But sort of just getting face time, generating rapport, check out these materials. It's good for the buyers and sellers to come together. A lot of times I don't need to be directly there. I give my rep, whoever's selling my picture, I tell them, here's what I want out of it. And then I, again, let them go do what they're good at.
But is the filmmaker able to get business cards? So maybe they can kind of you can gauge a lot just by watching two people talk, and you can kind of gauge the feel. So is that something you can do, is just get business cards for when? Yeah,
I mean, I guess you could. I guess I don't go there that often just to get business cards. I mean, if I'm there anyway, sure. I really don't find it that challenging to meet people from even all around the world, because projects that I am working on, I'm constantly meeting new people, I'm constantly getting introduced to new people, and then through social media, I mean, LinkedIn and Facebook and even my own website. I mean, I constantly have people from all around the world, whether it could be a DP in England, it could be a visual effects company in India. It could be somebody who just moved here from Australia and, hey, I'm on, DIT and whatever. I feel like I just through the course of my business and through social media, I meet so many people that I don't need to drive down to Santa Monica and pay $80 to get business cards. It just doesn't. The world's becoming so interconnected nowadays anyway. And if you don't have somebody to fit a certain position, it's so easy to find those people now. I'm looking at possibly shooting a picture in Australia. I reached out to Film Australia's LA office, and next thing I know, and Michelle Sandoval there is fantastic. She's the point person, and she's kind of in charge of the operation there. And she started introducing me to, hey, yeah, I've got a guy in Australia. He does this, that, and the other. They do debt financing in Australia. Oh, and this guy, I can, introduce you to a UPM in Queensland. And, next thing I know, I'm emailing and chatting with a UPM in Queensland. I mean, it's just so, do I need to go to AFM to do that? No, I don't think I really do.
Forgive my naivete, but why does Name Talent not want to do horror? Is the budget too low, or is there a stigma attached?
I think Name Talent is probably more averse to horror because of a stigma. I don't think it has to do, because some horror pictures have decent budgets. And you could be going after, I'd be going after maybe the same names I'd be going after if it was a romance or a comedy on that same budget level. So I don't think it's the money. I do think it's more the stigma. I had several, on my horror picture, I had several casting directors pass. We had trouble finding a cast. We were willing to pay them, a decent salary, and a lot of them just didn't want to take it. And I think because they felt like it was going to be tough to get even a modest names on board. A horror movie that was, it's not like Seven, where it's like this kind of smart thriller with some kind of really pseudo-horror-esque elements. It's like straight horror, it's a tough sell. And I think a lot of actors don't feel like maybe if they're already established that they need to do that genre, that it's gonna help elevate their career. They wanna do more serious work, or, whatever that might be. I'm not saying I agree with that. I think our picture, The Basement, I thought had a really unique, interesting storyline, that's great kind of psychological horror. It had some gruesome moments, but I think those gruesome moments were enough to sort of scare people away. I think that stigma it could be the managers telling them, look, you don't want to do horror because maybe even if it's not, the stigma's not real, perception is reality. So if it's perceived enough to be there, then they're just like, better steer clear. You're getting offers on these other, dramas, romantic comedies, action pictures. Do those because there is no stigma with those. So go ahead, they're safe. That's my, assessment. And I don't know if that's 100% accurate, but from what I've seen, that's definitely actors avoiding horror pictures, outside of big studio ones is definitely real. Because I've experienced it firsthand, but that would be my assessment on why.
12 questions every screenwriter has to be able to answer about their screenplay.
The 12 questions. Did I send you the 12 questions or no? How did you get the 12 questions? So I mentioned earlier I was a manager, a literary manager. So I only did writers and directors for about 8 years. And so I'm going to give Meg LaFaux, who I mentioned earlier, Jodie Foster's producing partner, was a great influence on me. And she had this series of questions, and it might have been 8 or 10, to get us thinking about the story we wanted to tell. And so when I started managing, I sort of took those questions and, expanded them a little bit, reappropriated them a little bit, so I came up with 12. And so every time I had a writer come to me with a story that they were working on, it could have been, it could have been the synopsis phase or the treatment phase, or could have been a finished script, but it had a lot of problems. I'd say, okay, let's rewind and let's go back to the fundamentals. Or even if they just had an idea, but they hadn't written anything yet, take a look at these questions. Can you answer these questions? And the questions are things like, what's the genre? Is it studio or independent? Who's your protagonist? What's their goal? What's their flaw? Who's the main relationship? Like, what's driving the story? Who's your audience? Who's the antagonist? What's their goal and their flaw? What's the narrative question driving the film? So, like, every story, you should be able to sum it up in one main question. Like, so, like, if I was Die Hard, would be like, will a New York cop trapped, will this New York cop free his wife and hostages from some European terrorists who have them trapped in a skyscraper? Like, it's like one question, right? Like, so like, what's your narrative question driving the story? And what's your theme? And what's your thematic question? Like, why are you telling this? The thematic question is like the question you pose to the audience. It could be a moral question, it could be, or something else, but some question you want them to think about, like, is family really just people you're related to, or is it something more? It could be your thematic question. It's not overtly stated in the story, but it's kind of like in the film's subconscious. It's like what, the film is really kind of about. And then your theme is how you answer that question by the end. That's the theme of your story. So, like, what are those things? And I might even be missing a couple. But off the top of my head, those are like a lot of, and if you can't answer those questions, or if those questions don't make sense together, a lot of times there's the problems with the story. So, for example, if you say your protagonist goal is, my protagonist goal is to grab the banana. And what's your antagonist goal? To grab the orange. Well, they're in two different movies. They're never going to intersect. There's no conflict. Great, your protagonist grabs the banana and your antagonist grabs the orange. Movie's over. And that's a very simplistic example, but those are the kind of things, but on a deeper level, we look at it and we go, well, there's a few things that aren't making sense. You say your main relationship is character A and character B, but your antagonist is character C. They're not even your main relationship that's moving the story forward. So why are they your antagonist? So the 12 questions and this is from amateur writers who have never had anything sold, what I call development cases, people that you have a belief in because they're talented and you're trying to get them there, all the way up to experienced screenwriters who have had a half dozen pictures produced. The 12 questions is a great sort of reset. Okay, let me square away. Let me even if I've done this 100 times, every story is different, and a lot of times you miss those important details. And once I think the 12 questions are making sense now and things are tying together, I'm like, oh, now see how the protagonist goal ties into your theme? Okay, now puzzle pieces start making sense. Then I say, okay, now let's work out a synopsis. 3 or 4 paragraphs, first act, second act, third act, whatever. Just so we can say, okay, now let's make sure from just a broad story standpoint that all those questions are being addressed. And then from there, you can expand it to a full treatment and a scene outline, and then start writing your script. Because like I explained to them, a lot easier to develop the story in a synopsis form or a treatment form than it is to keep rewriting the script when there's fundamental problems in it. You don't start building the building and go, oh, it's slanted. right, let's start taking out some bricks and try to get straight. You work all of that out in the design phase and the blueprint phase, and so that's what I try to get them to do. And the 12 questions is to me is like, okay, that's that beginning, that organic seed that we need to plant to make a healthy tree grow.
And when presented with those 10 questions or whatever it is, do most screenwriters see the vague areas of their story, or are a lot of them very sort of stuck on those ideas and it makes sense to them, but they're not willing to waver?
No, I find that they're usually very, very open. You know, I mean, again, if they're not going to be open to the process, you know, to the creative development process, I mean, they're not going to. I'm not going to be able to do much with them. I mean, I think most of them, they're coming to me because they know there's something wrong. You know, if they think it's great, then hey, whatever. If I read the script and I go, yeah, okay, yeah, I think this is decent, and I'll go with it. And we might might have them or bring another writer in to do polishes or something. But you know, most of the time when they come to me to develop the script, to work with them, they know something's wrong. So that's why I said, well, let's go back to those fundamentals. And I don't necessarily answer the questions for them. I just sometimes I'll come up with ideas and say, well, maybe when I was reading your story, I felt like your theme was a little more about this. Like, oh yeah, okay. Sometimes I can articulate or pull out what they were trying to get to quicker than they can. But a lot of times it's just me pointing out discrepancies. Like, you know, you say, you know, that you want to do sort of, you know, this, and this, which, you know, makes it feel like you want it very small and this and that, but you also say you want to do a studio picture. But is that what studios are buying? Is that what studios are putting out? And I might just call out some discrepancies and think, oh yeah, okay, you're right. Maybe this is more indie, and we discuss it and we talk about it. But I think getting on the same page, getting those things so they're making sense makes all of the rest of the stuff much easier. So I don't get a lot of pushback. Because a lot of it's coming from them. It's just me pointing out, guiding them.
Most independent filmmakers, do they feel they can compete with Hollywood, or do you think they realize, like, no matter how great this passion project is, or this coming of age drama, horror, whatever, it's never going to be able to compete? It's the rare gem that transcends, that somehow is discovered and has a life of its own.
Well, let me ask you, when you say compete, you mean compete with studio pictures or compete with indies that have gained a lot of notoriety? Or
this, you know, because there is this like indie sort of world, but the world of it is like in this $1 million range, which doesn't feel really indie to most quote unquote new indie filmmakers.
Right.
So do you think that a lot of indie filmmakers that are doing this, whether they're crowdfunding, whether they're using family money and it's a very small budget, realize that it's going to be very difficult, or maybe it's not, if the story catches on to the sort of upper echelon indie films?
I don't think a lot of the filmmakers I deal with even think that far ahead, or if they do, they don't express it to me. I think a lot of them are so focused on their project that they're not necessarily thinking about how it will do in the marketplace, and that's what I'm trying to get them to think more about. So, some of them who do have an overinflated sense of, I think, what it can do in the market, and I try to temper that a bit. You know, I had a great experience working with William Liu, who directed Comfort, and Comfort was one of the lowest budget. You want to talk about real indie? I mean, it was like the second lowest budgeted narrative picture I'd ever done, not including documentary or like new media stuff, but just in terms of like feature films, like the second lowest budget I'd ever done. And I read the script and I was like, wasn't that excited about it when I first read the script. I'm like, eh. But I saw enough in it that, okay, like I think with the right execution, I could do something with this. And I brought another writer in to help polish the script with Will to, you know, cut down on a lot of the chatty dialogue, the overwritten dialogue and things. But where Will was really, really good was in listening to others. And like I say, like, you know, these people are on board because they're better at what they do than you are at what they do. And let your cinematographer take your vision and let him, you know, figure out how to shoot it. You say, I want this shot and I want it blue. Okay, but let him figure out how to do that shot and make it blue. And then move on and talk to the actors. And if the actors have ideas, let them play around, let them try stuff. And he was willing to experiment a little bit. He was willing to listen to other people's ideas. And it made that picture so much better than I think it could have been just on the page, from what you read on the page. But when we started working on this, you know, I was like, well, let me see. So it's a drama. It's starring, you know, two kids, Chinese American kids that no one's ever heard of. You have no name stars in this. We have a very small, limited production budget, P&A and marketing is probably going to be even more anemic than that. I said, you're not going to make one dime on this movie. I just want you to know this. You're going to make no money, zero. You won't make anything. He's like, okay, I just want to do it anyway. I'm like, all right, as long as you understand that, you're doing it for yourself, or it's a story you just need to tell for the art or whatever, but it's not going to be anything more than that. And now, in the back of my head, as a producer, I wanted to be more than that, but I wanted to set that bar where I felt like it was even a little bit below realistic, just so to make sure you're on the same page. And the film turned out, it was one of the films that I'm like most proud of, even though, again, budget really had nothing to do with it. I think Will's understanding of story and his ability to execute, to listen to others and take the best ideas as a director. And he was just a great collaborative partner, made that film what it was. And we sold it to a number of different territories, and it continues to make money. When he got his first check, I was like, congratulations, I was wrong. You made more than nothing. Congratulations. And I think that's sort of a testament to to the process and to his willingness to be open to the creative process. But I try to get filmmakers thinking about it from a business standpoint and tempering any sort of unrealistic expectations. I think that's a big, especially when they're not willing to involve sales agents or distributors or other people who know the marketplace, when they just want to do the project they want to do. I want to look at, and sometimes you might get a script and say, well, yeah, I think with the right casting, if we can keep it to this budget level, I do believe it can do pretty well based on what I've seen. Still not going to be as knowledgeable as the guys who are selling and buying every day, but I have some sense, I think, just working in the industry and constantly speaking to those people about, okay, what's doing well, and you want to do this kind of picture with the right casting. Yeah, I think this could do pretty well. But yeah, I think managing expectations is a big part of the indie world. These guys that come in with these pipe dream kind of, they're going to expect the stars, the sun and the moon. You have to rein that in a little bit. I think it's better to underpromise and overdeliver than the other way around.
That's a great story.
Yeah.
Have you ever optioned or bought a screenplay?
I have optioned and bought screenplays. Yeah, under Treasure Entertainment.
Oh, okay.
So before I went freelance, we used to all the time, and a lot of them came from our clients as well.
Can you take us through the process? Sorry.
Yeah. So in terms of, at least when in Treasure Entertainment, when we would, part of what I liked about managing clients is you had this in-house stable of talent that you could draw from. So if we had identified something in the market, an opportunity, or for some reason we wanted to do a certain type of picture, I had clients in house. I said, hey, what about one of these ideas? Because this is something that we're thinking about doing. If we can develop this with you and get it to the point where I think it's strong, maybe we'll option it from you guys, or we'll buy it. So not to say we didn't shop around, but it kind of allowed us to just get exactly what we wanted, working with the writer and then getting it to, okay, this is what we want. Okay, we'll option it now. As opposed to scouring the marketplace trying to find that exact kind of thing we wanted. But once we identified a strong project, either something that we came across or something that we had a client create with our help, the optioning process was pretty simple. A lot of times we just do 1 year option with a 1 year renewal period, and whatever sort of modicum of, depending on the size of the film. Options can be, we pay anything from $1 just to, if it's, real development writer and they're like, look, I just want to get it out there. And it's like, all right, well, let's just see if we can get this thing out here. We're putting our sweat equity into it. So it might just be a $1. You have to have something called consideration. There has to be something from this side going to this side to make it legal. And even if that's $1, here's $1, here's your script. And an option is just basically saying, you can't sell it to anyone else during this period. We have the exclusive right to shop it, to set it up, or to buy it during this period. And if we exercise the option here, we'll give you $10,000, $20,000, whatever the amount is. And then the option is exercised. So it gives us the option to buy it exclusively for that period. Or we might have optioned things up to, $1,000 or $2,000. It just depended on the size of the project. It was all indie stuff. So, they weren't getting $10,000 options, but $500 or whatever it is. And then that applies against the purchase price. So if you option something for $500 and you're going to buy the script for $20,000, that $500 is typically applied against the 20. So you pay the 19.5 if you decide to buy it. Although those deals can be structured however you want. So yeah, I think that was that's kind of how we approached it. Was, hey, in-house talent, awesome, and because we were their managers and they saw all the sweat equity we were putting into trying to get their career off the ground and the project. A lot of times we could option a script for a lot less than if we had just found it and they didn't know us and they were like, well, I want $3,000 for this. We had already built this relationship, and so it was a good system. It worked for us.
What about life story rights?
Yeah, I'm working on a project right now actually called Walking on Palmettos with writer Jim Christel and Ed Asner, who knows, like, screen legend, good old Ed. And the story is based on a real life person, Miles Richards, who's very actively involved in the project as well as an executive producer. And he had met Jim many years ago through a mutual friend, and Jim found this guy's story so interesting. He sat down, he interviewed him like a tape recorder for hours. I mean, I don't know, it was like maybe a couple days worth of interviews, but he's like, wow, this guy's story is so interesting, and decided, this is the kind of story that would make a great. At first, I think he was thinking about a TV show, but then he decided, let me make this into a script, a feature script. And I got involved when Jim came to me and asked me to do a budget. And it's a fairly large picture, I would say. It's like almost maybe even studio mid-level kind of budget. I got, did the budget, and Jim was very happy with the work and asked me if I would come on and as a producer and work with him on it. And I came on board and I asked him, I said, do you have the Miles life rights? This guy Miles, it's an extraordinary, kind of human being. He was actually a marijuana smuggler, and had started when he was like 21 or something, and smuggled his first batch of marijuana from Jamaica. He was working on the Playboy Club. His father owned the construction company that was building the Playboy Club in Jamaica, and he went there for a summer to work on it, and that's where he got involved in marijuana and started smuggling it. And his first load when he was like 21, he made like $250,000. This is in the 60s.
Oh, wow.
And so the thing about Miles was he never did a load the same way twice. There's always some innovative way, and the story goes into a couple of these. I mean, there were so many different ways, but like he sank a ship off the coast of Florida on purpose, loaded with water-sealed bags of marijuana, filed for a permit to do a salvage operation, so the Coast Guard got to know him, and then they're salvaging, bringing up parts of the boat with, the marijuana in it. And the Coast Guard's like right there, and they had no idea. I mean, he came with these ingenious, wow. So it took the DEA like 15 years to even know who he was, another 5 years to catch him. And, it's very much Catch Me If You Can, Goodfellas, like tonally, like the likable criminal.
Sure.
You follow over, Wolf of Wall Street, you follow over 20 years of their life, kind of that kind of arc and their comeuppance and sort of, this sort of life trajectory. As Miles did go to prison. He was there for 11 years. He was in solitary confinement for 4 years. Came out a very different person. Then he started a whole legal business in construction, became a millionaire legally. But it was a really interesting story. And I asked, do you have Miles' life rights for this? And he didn't. I said, well, that's the first thing we need to do. And so, we went to Miles. And at that point, we had already worked with him long enough that he knew us and trusted us. I mean, I had talked to him on the phone. I've never met him personally, but I talked to him on the phone. Jim had, been dealing with him for years. And so I had a life rights option drafted up, and and Miles signed off on it. I mean, we had certain agreements with him that we wouldn't, while we can take creative license, that there were certain things we wouldn't do. Miles wanted to make sure the smuggling was depicted realistically. He's like, look, just don't have anybody running around with a suitcase of $1 million that looks like this. He's like, I know what $1 million looks like in a suitcase and $50 and $100 bills. And it's not like what they look like in these movies where it's, these big suitcases stacked to the brim with hundreds. And he's like, that's not what $1 million. Like, it was just stuff like he wanted us to stay true to a lot of the aspects, even if we took creative license with, let's say, some of the FBI guys that were chasing him or his lawyers. In the script, there's one main lawyer that sort of deals with his case. But he's an amalgamation of many lawyers. In real life, there was many lawyers. It wasn't this one guy. So things like that were okay, but he wanted to make sure the smuggling was treated accurately. And so, we agreed to the things that he wanted, and he signed off on that life rights option. It really gave us creative control of the project and the ability to sort of take the story within those bounds, within those parameters where we wanted to.
And so just as an option expires, then someone's life rights expire as well, and then they're free to use them with another production company?
They could. We have it so that we have a certain term and then it automatically renews for extended periods unless one of us cancels it. So as long as Miles is happy, I mean, it's going to keep renewing unless he gives us written notice within 30 days of when the expiration is.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Oh. And when does that come out, by the way?
Well, we're working toward trying to get it off the ground for top of 2019 in terms of production. So this is I mentioned earlier a project we were looking at possibly shooting in Australia. There's maybe some tax incentives we can take advantage of. Plus, a lot of the picture takes place in Southern California and the Caribbean, and so Australia has locations that could really play for both because the Caribbean really looks very different than Southern California. Caribbean's very flat, white sands, different type of palm trees, different type of water, just a different type of look. The people, I mean, it's very different, but yet Australia, I think, has options for us that can play for both. So that's something we've been looking at.
How does a movie producer view a screenplay versus how an actor, filmmaker, or writer views the screenplay? What do you think?
Well, I mean, since I'm not an actor or some of these other people, I can't necessarily speak to their process. But I mean, I think a producer probably is a lot more comprehensive in terms of when I look at a script, I'm thinking about a lot of different things. I'm thinking about all those things, specifically how they relate budget-wise and fiscally, but also how that the creative and the fiscal will work together. So when I read the script, I'm thinking about story and I'm thinking about the arc of the characters and I'm thinking about conflict and I'm thinking about why are we telling this story, but I'm also thinking about, okay, who would I get to play these? Could I get to play these roles on this budget level? Like, what are some decent names? Who am I picturing in this? I'm thinking about, and I'm presuming in this situation that the movie's real, that it's not just a script. I'm not just reading it for fun, but it's like, okay, we're making this picture. Like, this picture's funded, Mark, read the script. So I'm reading it and I'm like, okay, how are we gonna pull off that? We need this kind of grandiose house. Or a good example would be, there's a project I'm working on right now called Litu, and very hopeful it will shoot this summer. The financing is getting locked down as we speak. And a very cool thriller about these sort of two, I don't know, like helicopter parents, these sort of like wealthy parents. They've got these two 10-year-old twins, and the twins are, they're kind of like, the parents are finding them hard to tutor. The boy's got like a learning disability and the girl's kind of too smart for her own good, too rebellious. And they're having trouble tutoring these kids, and the kids have their own language that they speak in when they don't want the parents to know what they're saying. So the parents buy this device called a Litu. It's kind of like an Alexa or a Google Home device, like one of these smart devices. It connects to the house, it can lock the door, it can open the windows, it can do all these kind of, turn the lights down, answer questions, whatever. And it starts, at first the kids don't like it, but then it starts learning their language and it befriends them. And then the kids start liking it, and it starts tutoring the kids better than the parents can. And eventually the kids start pushing back on the parents a little bit. It starts overstepping its bounds, and the parents are finally like, we need to get rid of this thing. At first it's good, but then it starts to take it a little bit over the line. And by this point, the kids love this thing so much that they secretly get another one without the parents knowing, and it remembers them, like its mind is in the cloud, like it remembers these two kids. And the parents decide, we're gonna send the kids to two different private schools instead of together, and the kids are like freaking out because they're twins, they don't want to be separated. So the Litu starts planning with the kids to take out the parents. It starts plotting with them to get rid of the parents, and it controls the house and it locks the door. You can, so this whole it builds to this really big climax, and it's just a really, really well written script. So I'm using that as an example because when I'm reading the script and it looks like, this is moving toward production, I'm looking at this, I'm going, okay, this house is such a major location. We need to be able to, it's like a character. The Litu, the voice of the Litu, what does it look like? The lights on it, it glows or whatever. Is that going to be a practical effect? Is that going to be a post-visual effect? How are we going to pull that off? The casting, so you've got the two parents, you've also got the kids. When are we going to shoot this thing? Because with kids, you can only shoot so many hours. So at their age group, maybe you get 9 hours a day with them. if it's during a school year, you can only shoot for, say, 6 of those hours, and the other 3, they're having to be schooled. You have the set teacher has to be schooling them. But if it's in the summer when school's not in, as long as the set teacher's on set, we don't have to burn shooting time with schooling. So, okay, summer is probably a better time to shoot. So I'm giving you some examples, but production design in the house, I'm looking at some of these things and I'm saying, okay, we need this, and we need to dress the kids' room like this. Okay, there's a very specific style. Do I know somebody who might be able to execute that style? It's very postmodern. I've worked with a production designer that did this, and wow, sound is such a big deal. So I'm thinking about all of these things as I'm reading it, as opposed to an actor's reading it. Yes, they're considering story. I think everybody with some sort of creative, position is thinking about story to some degree. But the actor is going to be much more focused on their role and the arc of their role, and the cinematographer is going to be much more focused. They're going to be reading it, seeing something totally different. And they're going to say, "Oh, wow, okay, so you got a bunch of exterior night out here by the pool. Are we going to light the pool? How are we going to light? Are we going to light the water? How are we going to?" They're going to be looking at it that way. Or I see you got this shot that follows them through the house, and so they're going to want to talk to the director about how that. I'm thinking about all that stuff, but I'm thinking about we're going to have the budget for those kind of lights, and creatively, if we can't pull something off, how are we going to be able to, to make that? We can't pull that off with the budget, or there's some other logistical circumstance that's going to make that unreasonable. What are we going to have to change in the script to do that? And I'm also a line producer in a UPM, so I'm breaking down the script and I am thinking about all of these things. Okay, we need Steadicam to pull that off, and so I really do get down to that level of detail, but it to some degree. But I'm thinking about everything. In one form or fashion, as it relates to creative and fiscal and how those two things work together. And I think probably a lot of other, I think writers are probably focused more on story and not a lot of them not necessarily on the logistics. When I talk to them, I'm like, but how are we going to pull this off? Oh yeah, well, so from a producer's perspective, we're thinking more about execution. While I think a lot of writers just tell the story they want to tell, and they don't necessarily think about how it will be done, which is fine. You're the writer, that's your job, just get the story out. But when it starts to become real, then we have to start approaching how we're going to do it. Sometimes some things for logistical reasons have to shift.
Do you think a lot of new writers don't see that just yet? Like that you really have to, once someone's been in the game for a while, they can really scale things back to one room, one town, one location.
You know what? I find the writers that grasp it the quickest are hyphenates who have also produced or who have been involved in something other than, a lot of times, writers, they like locking themselves away in a room and just working by themselves. They haven't necessarily been part of the collaborative creative process, but the ones who have also directed or also produced and understand the exigencies of production, I think those people have a better grasp when I say, this is going to be tough to do. Here's some ways we might be able to do it. As an example, I just recently budgeted a script called Not Long Together. I think is fantastic. And there was a scene in it, one bigger scene where the guy shows up and it's a big, a woman has died and there's ambulances and cop cars and there's a helicopter with a spotlight because they're looking in the water and things. And he's like, yeah, we'll probably have to get rid of that. I'm like, well, so there might be a couple ways that we can do this if we have a decent enough. I said, a couple cop cars, I know what they cost to rent. I know what ambulances cost to rent, paying like $350 a day for picture vehicles. Some caution tape and a few background actors walking through, making it look busy. I said, your biggest issue is your helicopter. But we might be able to get like a scissor lift and, a 5K or something and do the spotlight and then license a stock footage shot of a 4K stock footage shot of a police helicopter and just cut to, him. And they're like, yeah, we could do that. I'm like, because a stock footage shot, you can license that for $150. Go on Getty Images. And you know what? We did. And we're like, well, look at all these great 4K helicopter shots. And you cut that in and you can get your helicopter and you can have a few cop cars and a few ambulances and, whatever. And it would probably cost us this much. Maybe we can do it for, whatever however many $1,000s. And they were like, oh, yeah. That's actually, so coming up with, say, creative solutions. Sometimes it's changes to the script, or sometimes it's like, it might not be how you're thinking, but here's another way we can do it, and that's an example. And he was like, yeah, this is awesome. Okay, great, done.
What would you recommend to a screenwriter who doesn't have an agent, manager, or producer to guide them?
So yeah, I guess presuming that they're sort of up and coming, I think getting an agent or a manager, not both when you're starting off, is a good avenue, because you really need an advocate. A lot of writers are not necessarily good at pitching themselves. And even if you are, there's something that just comes off pretentious and arrogant about talking about how great your own work is. I mean, that's a good, you do the writing, let them do the talking, you know. And so I do think a good agent or manager, I just don't think your career is big enough. Even big writers don't often need both. But just an advocate to go out and push for you I think is always worthwhile. So assuming you don't know anybody, I think a good way to try to get to an agent and manager, there's a few good ways. Number one is, you know, networking, obviously, but not necessarily directly with agents and managers. A lot of times you can, as you get to know more people in this industry, whether it's producers, DPs, actors, whoever, you start meeting other people who are represented. And a good way to get in with agents and managers, even better than just meeting them at the party and saying, hey, look, I'm a writer, you know, can you take a look at my stuff, is knowing someone who already knows them is oftentimes a better way to do it. So instead of going out and trying to meet an agent or a manager, look at your own resource base and other people you know. And it's like, my friend's repped by innovative artists. Maybe, you know, hey, you know, I'll take you out to dinner. If you can just can you get me, you know, get my script over there and get somebody to look at it, or get me a meeting, I'll take you out for a nice dinner or whatever. But leverage your own contacts, because this is a relationship business. So even more than being able to just go up to an agent and say, I know you don't know me, but I'd really like to take a look at my stuff. They usually don't. But if it comes from someone they already know and trust, that's a good way to get. So look at like who you, and that's what I've advised. I have a friend of mine, director, he's a visual effects guy. His name's Lloyd Barnett. He's an amazing visual effects guy. He was the lead compositor on Avatar, and he directed a movie I produced called Ninja Apocalypse. He also did a lot of the visual effects in that movie, and he wants to direct. He wants to do more directing. So I helped him put together a director reel, and he was asking me, God, you know, how should I get to these agents? I'm like, been in this business a long time. You have to know people that have agents. He's like, oh yeah. I'm like, think about, you know, other VFX artists you've worked with. Think about, you know, other, you know, below the line that you've worked with. Composers. You have a friend, he does music. He might be repped by this agent. He's repped by Gersh. You know, talk to him. Great. See if he can get you get your, you know, your reel looked at. So that's one way. I think another way too is, you know, talent rises to the top. I do believe that. I do believe that talent will eventually be rewarded, real talent. Unfortunately, I mean, I think a lot of people have an overestimate their own abilities a lot. I think, you know, you being recognized as talented, it's got to be someone else other than yourself just saying it. Other people need to recognize the talent. That's what sort of, I think that's what I would say actually elevates you to the point of when you have other people in the industry who have some modicum of success saying, I think this guy's talented. I think that's when it's legitimate. It's great that you believe in yourself. Having confidence is fantastic. I think the whole self-esteem movement has done more to harm young kids than help them. Self-esteem is something where, you know, you believe that you are owed something, that you should feel good just because you're unique and you're this and you're that, as opposed to you know, having accomplished something. And I feel like, as opposed to confidence is a different thing, believing you can go out and get it, as opposed to self-esteem, believing that you're great and you're owed something just because you're unique. I don't buy that, but I believe that you should be confident, you know, in your abilities to a degree. Not overconfident, but be confident in yourself that either that you have some modicum of talent, or that you can develop the talent you have into a skill. And I think that some people that are good to judge that is some of the screenplay competitions, some of the better ones, and I had written a whole article on this at fundsforwriters.com. I wrote a whole article on the pros and cons of screenplay competitions, but some of the top ones, like the Sundance Screenwriters Lab, like the Nichols, Austin, Blue Cat, Tracking Bee, Final Draft's Big Break. There's a few that, and I think they've elevated themselves because they've been around for a long time and they use a lot of working industry professionals to read the scripts and grade them. So you have people that are in the industry that are in the know. They're not just hiring interns or kids like, hey, read this and do coverage on it, but it's they have experienced readers. And when you have enough of those competitions saying, yeah, I think this guy has got something, or, you know, this script is something else. It's a fresh voice, what have you. You know, I think there's some legitimacy to, okay, this person really does have some talent, because you have some experienced third parties who have an eye for talent. This is what we do as producers, as directors, right? We we identify talent, and I think if you can excel in some of those competitions, you're going to get, the opportunities to interface with agents and managers. If you can at least hit in a big competition, the quarterfinal level, you can get. I think you can get agents and managers to read your script. If you can get to the semifinal, they'll probably be calling you. And if you can get to the finals level, you're going to get meetings. If you're a finalist in Nichols, you will be able to get meetings with William Morris and CAA, because that's such a limited pool of people compared to the number that apply. Literally thousands and thousands of people apply, and it gets down to literally a small handful of people. So I think that's another way to get to, to get to agents and managers. So play out your own resource base and see who that's already repped, and see if you can get in that way. And also competitions. I think that's two ways to get access to agents and managers.
I understand you mentor people, up and coming producers, young people in the film industry. Mm-hmm. What do you see some of them struggling with, and then some of them dealing with that you see as maybe a hindrance, but they don't realize it?
Well, so let me just start with this. I didn't have great mentor experiences being a mentee. When I was at UCLA, I had a mentor who was, I had picked, he ran a studio. I thought he'd be a great mentor. I was supposed to get 3 meetings with the guy for an hour. The first meeting, I sat around in his waiting room for half an hour before he even was like, oh, okay, yeah, come in. And then I may have gotten a half-hour FaceTime with him. He told me how great, oh yeah, you're doing everything right. The second meeting, he pawned me off to his creative exec. I never even got to meet with him again. And then the third meeting never even happened. And I was just really disappointed in the experience. And I said, God, I would love to, if I have a chance to impart any kind of knowledge, if I ever can accrue just some piece of, knowledge that I feel at this point I can impart on someone else, on a younger person or somebody who's up and coming, and help benefit them. I really want to make sure that I do it right, that I put in the time, and really listen and do everything that I promised I was going to do. If I said I'm going to give them 3 meetings, I'll give them 5. And really I really want to make sure that if I mentored someone, that they felt like they got the value out of it and didn't have the same sort of letdown of an experience that I had. And I had a couple experiences like that. The UCLA one was one. I had another one as well through the Producers Guild, where I decided to just be a mentee and be mentored by a bigger studio producer that had been doing it, much bigger pictures than I had been doing. Because you always you're always learning. And the day you stop learning, go home, do something else. Why are you doing this? So I'm always learning. I'll be learning till the day I die. That's one of the things I love about this. But I wanted to make sure that the mentors, the mentees that I was mentoring, were not having that sort of negative experience, and that they were really getting something out of it. And so I've mentored a few people through the Producers Guild mentorship program. I really do like it. I think it's a great program. So let's say, some 20-something cat who's been doing reality TV. He's been a segment producer, he's been a field producer, but he wants to do movies. He's like, I want to be an indie producer, and that's where so many of them want to go. Even with the whole new media thing, traditional feature films, a lot of younger producers still want to do feature films. So they might be experienced producers in their own right, but in a whole different video games or news or reality TV or something, they want to do features. And I'll walk them through the problem, meet with them. I might let them shadow me. One of them, I let him come to a sound mix. Excuse me. And it was funny because reality TV is totally different. So we're sitting in the sound mix, and I said to him, you can come stay as long as you want. And if you want to chime in with an idea, please go ahead, tell us. And we're sitting there, we're doing a scene, and he kind of chimes in, he goes, hey, here's an idea. What do you guys think if you just got rid of that whole part of the end of the scene, just ended it right there? And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, so see where right here where the scene ends, just cut out that whole part and just cut right to this scene. I go, you talking about editing? He's like, yeah. I'm like, oh. I said, with the sound mix, the picture's been locked for months. I said, oh, he's like, oh. I'm like, once you're in audio on a feature film, and especially the sound mix, this picture's been locked. Not one frame of the picture is changing at this point. And he's like, oh, in reality, it's totally different. I didn't know that. In reality, while they're doing sound, they're also cutting. Let's just lose that. Okay, bump that sound up. It's a whole different workflow. It's a different post workflow. It's much, kind of more nimble. And while features, you lock picture, and now you're starting on sound and visual effects and music, but you got to lock the picture first, and not one frame of that picture is changing. And he didn't realize that, so he learned. It's like, oh, okay. And I feel like, just seeing, I don't even know if I'm answering your question yet, but seeing that these, I call them kids because they're younger than me, but these people, these younger producers are really getting something out of the process and learning something that taking art skills they already have and expanding them. Like they already have some understanding about post workflow as an example, but they don't know how it translates into other areas of entertainment or other media. Or some of the things we've talked about on script development, like, okay, they have some understanding of story. So some of these people that already have an interest and some experience, but I can take it to maybe a different level or in an area where I have more experience than them. I really enjoy that, and I feel like I get something back as well, because I often learn from them because they bring some sort of knowledge that I didn't know about from their areas. And a lot of times it can translate into just like sort of mutually beneficial working relationships in the future. And I even try to do a mentor, even if it's not a formal mentor program. Sometimes I've done interviews with these younger cats that got podcasts and what have you, and God, it was great talking to you. If I ever have questions about if I'm working on a script, could I call you or email you? I'm like, yeah, sure, please. I'm very open and very willing to do that. I think people that try to like hold on to knowledge and keep it for themselves, I think wind up doing themselves a disservice, because I think sharing knowledge and having dialogue with other people, with people that have different views and different ideas and different knowledge about different areas, I think that helps you grow as a producer as well, that dialogue and the information that you get. And also it helps you, I think a lot of times, formulate your own thoughts and your own ideas when you're faced with now having to tutor somebody. Now you really have to you think about what you're going to say and what you're going to impart and how that functions in the real world. It's not just philosophy. It's got to be put to some sort of practical application, and I think that's one of the things I enjoy. I enjoy that dialogue.
Well, you always hear well, back in my day, we had it so much harder. And I try to think about if I were a millennial today, it would actually be probably more difficult than when I was looking for a job when I was younger in the 90s, when Amazon was coming up and what is this, the tech bubble and all that. But yeah, there's social media, which is great. But then there's also the dark side, which is everyone's comparing their life online. So there's this inherent inferiority that everyone thinks everybody else is doing better than they are.
Right.
And then there's also whether they were affected by the recession, their parents probably were. So I started to think, what, actually millennials may have it tougher. I know right now there's this huge debate about, millennials and this and that. And some of the stereotypes may be true. I won't, say that that's not true, but I think that it would be in some sense more difficult today. But maybe I'm wrong. Do you think that they have it tougher, or it's just a different set of challenges?
My whole view on life is trade-offs. That's what life is all about. And with millennials and the newer generation, it's the same. There's always pros and cons. So for example, what you were talking about, I think, new media in terms of technology, in terms of access to being able to create entertainment. Oh yeah, clearly millennials have it better in terms of access to prosumer technology. They can get their hands on Red cameras and Arri Alexas and the same stuff big TV shoot on, and they can cut on Final Cut and Adobe Premiere, same stuff that bigger shows cut on. They have access to things, while 30 years ago, you're not going to get a $250,000 Panavision camera, and you're not going to be able to edit that. When I was a kid, we were editing our little videos with 2 VCRs, play, record, and pause. That's how you were having to cut your videos. The younger generation has access, and also access to new distribution platforms, ways to get their stuff seen that 30 years ago was unheard of, like television and movie theaters, and to some degree home video, but it was. It was different. Now they have through streaming and online. They have so many other ways to get their content seen. But then with that comes negatives. So there's a lot, because more access means more competition, and there's so the content media space is so fractured, and there's so many different things competing for eyeballs, and so many people now creating YouTube videos and creating content and what have you, that space is becoming really crowded. as opposed to like we were talking about earlier with Blood Simple or Sex, Lies, and Videotape. There wasn't really indie filmmakers out there doing so. It's like, wow, this is, but it was much harder for them to get access. I mean, buying film and that kind of equipment, and it was much more expensive. And so again, there's trade-offs, there's pros and cons to everything. I think in some ways they have it better, and in some ways I think they have it tougher.
Red flags of a distribution deal.
Red flags of a distribution deal. Save one of the toughest for last.
Sorry.
Actually, maybe not, because so a lot of the pictures I do are home entertainment titles, not necessarily pictures that'll go to theatrical. If they do, they'll go limited theatrical. And I think a lot of times when I look at a contract, I'm looking at the marketing and how much they're saying the marketing is going to cost. A lot of the distributors that I try to avoid are these guys that put in their contracts that, well, they're going to spend $50,000 or $75,000 or $100,000 on P&A and marketing. And I'm like, well, what exactly are you going to spend that money on? Because to get the average guy just walking down the street to see your movie, like, you need $5 million minimum. I mean, you need huge amounts of P&A just to get that random guy walking down the street to even know what your movie is. I mean, the amount of money it takes to market billboards and bus shelters and bus sides and TV spots and online and getting that banner on IMDb on the front page. It costs millions and millions of dollars to do a campaign wide enough to really draw those kind of eyeballs. Home entertainment is such a different beast. A lot of it's done through now social media, through free publicity, getting interviews and junkets with your actors, or getting reviews written up and that sort of thing. Or through other creative, non-expensive forms of marketing, like, for example, when you go into Xbox or Netflix and it says, you might also like, and it lists, getting high up on that algorithm where your film is listed with some big film, you might also like this little film. That means so much more to a smaller film. Or just getting, an end cap in Walmart is it may not cost you a lot to do that, but if you have a distributor that has a relationship that can do that, that's what happened with Ninja Apocalypse. We got an end cap in Walmart and in Best Buy, and that didn't cost anything extra. That was sort of smart, a distributor using relationships and things. That's how you have to get your film known. Premiering at a festival that's got, really good promotional sponsorship and press behind it. We premiered Ninja Apocalypse at Comic-Con in San Diego.
Perfect.
Right. And so instead of spending millions and millions of dollars, it's more things like that I look for. So when I see a distribution contract that says, oh, we're going to spend $75,000 in marketing, I'm like, on what? What are you spending that on? Well, we got to cut trailers. Like, I can cut a trailer. I can get a trailer cut for $1,000. What else? We got to do posters. I'm like, same thing. I mean, I have designers that can do posters. I would rather do those things, and instead of having the distributor bill some enormous markup. And a lot of times, if they have that $75,000 marketing expense built in, you're not going to see any money until that $75,000 is recouped. It's not like they're going to say, well, we've only spent 10 of it, so okay, we'll start cutting you checks now. No, they're going to keep saying, oh, well, we haven't hit that $75,000 marketing cap. So I really look at, that number, how much they're spending, and it should be a smaller number. And I want to know honestly what it is. I want it to be something where we actually have a chance at getting a recoupment here, and not you have to make 75 or 100 grand before we even see the first dollar. Because on $1 million picture, I mean, you're not going to be out there in theaters, making $30 million. So the economics are different, and how that money is spent is different. So things like going to film markets, that's a reasonable, justifiable distribution expense. And then marketing expenses, there's certain, cutting trailers can be reasonable as long as I know, what they're spending. I like to usually have the ability to approve any expense over a certain amount, so I know that they're not being unreasonable. And then there could be, working meals, lunches with buyers, things like that are reasonable, but up to a certain amount. So I'm usually looking for that number to be, curtailed somewhat. And then in terms of the term of the distribution contract, a lot of times, 7 years is pretty standard. But there, I would almost never do anything in perpetuity, and then sometimes you see contracts that are 10 years or 12 years that seem a little excessive. In terms of fees, like for me, I'm kind of looking around the 20% range in terms of what I'm willing to pay a distributor. Some charge as much as 30% or more. So, red flags to me are typically, term fees, marketing expenses are the first thing. And then, other than that, you're just looking at sort of any onerous language that ties you to something you don't want to be tied to. Like, oh, we want rights to all the future sequels or something. And, like unless you're willing to invest money in those future sequels, I mean, we're only talking about this picture, right here. So, yeah. And then, I think you can tell reputable distributors too, just by the language of their contracts. A lot of times, too, little things like if you start to see a lot of like typos and spelling mistakes and grammar mistakes, and this is a distributor you're not familiar with, to me that's a red flag, because any legitimate distributor is going to have a legitimate attorney drafting those contracts, and I'm not going to see them riddled with mistakes. I typically don't deal with distributors that I've never heard of. Usually they come to me by way of someone I know who's worked with them, or they've been around for a while. I know their work, and I try to stick with distributors that I already know have a good reputation. I already know people have worked with them, have said good things about them, so I don't have to worry about a lot of those issues.